Hello, and welcome to Velvet Night Vellum. Imagine a monument rising from a quiet desert, built without steel, without engines, without the sound of modern machines. Imagine stone shaped by patience and repetition, set down by steady hands that move the same way, again and again, across many seasons. By every simple measure, such a structure should not have lasted, and yet, it remains. For centuries upon centuries, the pyramids have stood in near silence. Generations have come and gone, languages have shifted, empires have formed and faded, winds have traced familiar paths across the sand. And still, those calm shapes hold their place beneath the stars, unchanged in their essential form. So how did this happen? How did ordinary people, guided by simple tools and careful routines, create something that continues to feel timeless? What kind of thinking allows a society to build not for a moment, but for a horizon so far away it barely feels real? And why do these quiet structures invite us to slow down and wonder, rather than to rush toward answers? Tonight, we will explore the pyramids in a gentle way. We will move slowly through what is known, and rest comfortably beside what remains uncertain. We will consider the rhythms of work and life that surrounded these stones, and the calm logic that guided their creation. We will trace the long arc of time without counting years too closely, letting centuries drift by like soft clouds across an open sky. This is not a story of conquest or conflict. It is a story of light and time, of human attention stretched carefully across long distances. And because the year is turning and nights are growing longer, we will also touch a familiar feeling that returns each winter, the quiet comfort of light in darkness, and the steady sense that night, however long it feels, always gives way. Before we continue, you're welcome to take a small moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple way to support these calm stories, and it helps this quiet channel reach others who are looking for rest. And if you feel like it, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from tonight. Now, settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Allow your breathing to find an easy rhythm. Imagine the modern world growing distant, like a low sound fading behind closed doors. Picture a dim room, a gentle glow, and the sense that there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. The pyramids do not demand attention. They do not hurry the mind. They offer a steady presence, the way a candle offers light without calling for notice. Stone holds warmth from the day and releases it slowly into the night. Sand shifts, settles, and rests again. Time moves forward, unannounced. As we begin, it helps to remember that these monuments did not appear all at once. They were not imagined in a single moment. They grew out of ordinary days, out of familiar movements repeated until they felt natural. They emerged from a landscape shaped by water and sun, by cycles that returned with reliable calm. This story begins before the stone took its final form. It begins with people waking to mornings that felt much like the day before. It begins with quiet routines and patient observation. It begins with an understanding that lasting things are built slowly, with care and without hurry. And this is where the story begins. The beginning was not marked by ceremony or announcement. There were no grand plans drawn across parchment, no declarations meant to echo into the future. There was only a landscape that returned the same way each day, and people who learned to listen to it quietly. Long before stone rose against the sky, the land beside the river followed a gentle rhythm. Water arrived, then slowly withdrew. The soil darkened, then lightened again. Seasons passed, not as numbers, but as familiar changes in air, in colour, in feeling. People learned when to move, when to wait, and when to let things be. Life unfolded close to the ground. Feet pressed into earth still cool from the night. Hands reached into water that carried both nourishment and promise. The river did not rush, and neither did those who depended on it. Over time, this patience became habit. Shelter came first, simple and low. Walls that kept out wind, roofs that softened the heat of the sun. Nothing built to impress, only to endure another day. These early structures were not meant to last forever. They were meant to be useful and then replaced when needed. Yet even here, something subtle was taking shape. People began to notice patterns, the way shadows shifted across open ground, the way certain places remained cooler, or steadier, or quieter. They noticed where the land felt firm beneath their weight, and where it yielded gently before settling again. Observation became understanding, and understanding became quiet confidence. Stone lay nearby, heavy and patient. It did not move unless invited. When touched, it resisted just enough to demand respect. People learned its texture, rough edges that softened with work, dust that clung briefly, then fell away. Stone taught slowness simply by being what it was. Over many seasons, stone was placed where it felt right, not high, not ambitious, just enough to mark a space, to remember a moment, to honor a presence. These early placements were not monuments. They were gestures, small acknowledgements that something mattered enough to be remembered. The sky remained wide and constant above it all. The sun rose, traced its arc, and returned again. Light mattered, not as a mystery, but as a guide. It showed when to begin, when to rest, when to gather. Over time, people began to align themselves with it, quietly adjusting their lives to its steady return. Generations passed without counting. Knowledge moved from hand to hand, not through instruction, but through watching. One person adjusted a stone slightly, another noticed. A movement repeated became a method repeated became tradition. There was no urgency to build higher, no reason to hurry. The land was not going anywhere. The river would return, the sun would rise. Time felt expansive, generous, and unpressured. Slowly, the idea of permanence began to form, not as a goal, but as a possibility. If something could be placed carefully enough, aligned patiently enough, perhaps it could remain. Perhaps it could outlast the moment that created it. This thought did not arrive all at once. It settled gradually, like fine sand after movement. It rested quietly in shared understanding. And with that understanding came a shift in intention, not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. Stone was no longer placed only for use. It was placed with care, with repetition, with attention that extended beyond the present day. The beginnings of something lasting were taking shape, almost without notice. And as these quiet origins deepened, as routines grew more refined and confidence more assured, the foundations were set for something larger to emerge, something shaped not by force, but by consistency. And this gentle accumulation of habits is where growth slowly began. Growth did not arrive as a sudden change. It appeared quietly, almost invisibly, woven into routines that already felt familiar. What had once been done for simple shelter or remembrance began to carry a slightly wider intention, still calm, still unhurried. Stone was gathered with more care now, not because it was scarce, but because attention had learned its value. Pieces were chosen for their steadiness, for how they rested against one another. Weight was tested slowly. Balance was felt, not calculated. When something did not sit well, it was adjusted without frustration, then tried again. Days continued to unfold in their usual way. Morning light spread softly across open ground. Work followed the cool hours, then eased as the sun climbed higher. Rest came naturally, not as an interruption, but as part of the rhythm itself. In this steady cycle, skill deepened. Hands learned how stone responded to pressure. A slight turn changed everything. A small shift created strength. Knowledge was not written down. It was remembered in muscle and movement, passed along simply by doing. As foundations widened, they remained close to the earth. Nothing strained upward yet. The emphasis was on stability, on learning how weight travelled downward and outward. The ground was listened to carefully. It spoke through firmness, through subtle settling, through the quiet assurance that something placed well would remain. Light continued to guide these choices. Shadows revealed angles. Sunlight lingered longer on certain faces of stone, offering warmth, then releasing it slowly. Observation became instinct. Alignment followed naturally, without needing explanation. Over time, spaces took on a different feeling. They felt intentional, even when nothing about them felt grand. A sense of order emerged, not imposed, but discovered. The way one stone met another suggested the next step. Patterns formed because they worked, not because they were planned. People moved within these spaces calmly. There was no rush to finish, no sense of competition. What mattered was continuity. The work of one day flowed easily into the next. If something remained unfinished, it waited without consequence. Generations overlapped gently. Those who began certain foundations did not always see them completed, and that felt natural. Work was not owned by individuals. It belonged to the rhythm of the community, to the long view that did not depend on recognition. As confidence grew, foundations extended outward and inward at the same time. Outward into broader bases, inward into shared understanding. The idea that something could last beyond a single lifetime no longer felt abstract. It felt practical. This growth did not change daily life dramatically. Meals were still simple, evenings still quiet, rest still necessary. The work fit into life rather than replacing it. That balance kept everything steady. What was forming was not yet a monument. It was a method, a way of building that trusted patience more than speed, repetition more than force. And from this calm, reliable foundation, the structures that followed would rise naturally, guided by the same quiet logic as the story moves gently toward the systems and societies that supported it all. What emerged next was not a sudden change in how people lived, but a soft layering of structure over what already existed. Life continued much as before, yet within it, small roles became clearer and shared responsibilities settled into place. Some people became especially familiar with stone, others with measuring by sight, by shadow, by the feel of balance under the hands. No one announced these roles. They formed naturally, guided by habit and trust. When someone knew a task well, others stepped aside and allowed that knowledge to flow forward. Work followed the rhythm of the day. Early hours were used for movement and placement, when the air was cool and forgiving. Midday invited rest and reflection. Evenings brought a return to quiet gathering, to simple meals, to conversation that drifted easily and then faded. Order did not come from command. It came from repetition, from the comfort of knowing where to stand, what to lift, and when to pause. The same motions performed many times grew efficient, without ever becoming hurried. Efficiency here was calm, not urgent. Leadership existed, but it was understated. Decisions were guided by experience rather than authority. Those who had seen more seasons were listened to a little longer. Those who had steadier hands were trusted with heavier tasks. Respect moved quietly, without ceremony. Materials were gathered and prepared in advance. Stone rested nearby, waiting patiently. Nothing was forced into use before its time. When something was ready, it was used. When it was not, it remained where it was, undisturbed. This way of living created stability. Not the kind that resists change, but the kind that absorbs it gently. If something shifted, it was corrected slowly. If an idea proved unhelpful, it faded away without conflict. Belief and meaning existed alongside this work, but they did not disrupt it. The sky remained important. Light remained important. Cycles were noticed and respected. What was built reflected these observations, not through symbolism, but through alignment and care. Over time, these systems made larger projects possible without strain. When many people moved with the same quiet understanding, complexity felt manageable. Nothing needed to be rushed, because everything had its place. The community learned how to sustain long effort without exhaustion. By allowing rest, by accepting pauses, by trusting that tomorrow would arrive, ready to receive what was left undone. Through this gentle organization, something remarkable became possible. Structures could grow larger while life remained calm. Work could extend across years without urgency, and daily routines could continue undisturbed, even as something enduring took shape nearby. From this quiet social order, balanced and patient, the story drifts naturally toward the most restful part of all the steady flow of everyday life, where nothing feels urgent and everything simply continues. Daily life did not announce itself. It unfolded softly, the way light spreads across a room before anyone notices it has arrived. Morning did not begin with a signal or a sound. It began with a gradual warmth in the air, a gentle brightening that made shapes clearer without demanding attention. People woke slowly, not pulled from sleep, but carried out of it. Bodies stretched in familiar ways. Feet touched the ground that had cooled overnight. Breathing found its rhythm, before thought did. There was no sense of being late, because time was not measured in moments, only in movement. The first tasks of the day were small and steady. Water was gathered, not hurriedly, but with care that came from repetition. Hands knew the weight of the vessels they carried. Arms adjusted naturally. Nothing spilled unless it needed to, and if it did, it was wiped away without comment. Work began as an extension of waking. Stones were approached calmly, as one might approach something already known. Fingers brushed their surfaces, feeling for balance, for texture, for the subtle cues that told whether a piece was ready to be moved or should remain where it was. Movement was deliberate, but never strained. Lifting happened with breath, not force. Setting something down was done with attention, not urgency. When a stone rested correctly, there was no celebration. Correctness felt quiet and complete on its own. Sound existed, but it was minimal. The soft scrape of stone against stone, the low murmur of voices, exchanging only what was necessary. Often, there were long stretches with no speech at all, where shared presence was enough. The sun rose higher, without being watched. As its warmth grew stronger, work shifted naturally. People adjusted their positions, stepping into shade without instruction. Tasks slowed, not because they had to, but because the body suggested it. Mid-morning passed without notice. Hunger arrived gently and was met just as gently. Meals were simple and familiar. Food was eaten slowly, without distraction, tasting of routine rather than novelty. Eating was not a break from work. It was part of the same flow. Children moved freely through these spaces, observing without being directed. They watched hands work. They watched how weight was shifted, how patience looked when practiced daily. Learning happened without lessons, absorbed through proximity and repetition. After eating, the day softened further. The sun rested higher, and with it came a natural pause. Bodies settled into stillness. Some sat, some lay back against warm stone. Eyes closed briefly, not to sleep deeply, but to rest lightly. Breath slowed. The world felt suspended, held in place without effort. No one worried about productivity. Nothing was being lost. Rest was not something earned, it was something expected. The work would wait, and waiting did not feel like delay. When movement resumed, it did so gradually. There was no signal to begin again. Someone stood, another followed. Tools were picked up as though they had never been put down. The rhythm returned easily. Stone was adjusted again. A piece placed earlier was revisited. Perhaps it sat well. Perhaps it needed a small change. Either way, the process remained calm. Nothing was forced into completion. As the day moved toward afternoon, light shifted and shadows lengthened. This change guided attention more than any spoken instruction. Work adapted to it naturally, following comfort rather than command. Conversation appeared and faded as needed. Sometimes a few words clarified a movement. Sometimes silence clarified it better. There was no need to fill the air. Evening approached quietly. The heat eased. The air cooled. Muscles loosened. The sense of effort dissolved into a feeling of having done enough. Work ended not because it was finished, but because the day had completed its arc. Tools were set aside without ceremony. Stones remained where they were, patient and unchanged. Simple lights appeared as the sky dimmed. Small flames offered warmth rather than brightness. They flickered gently, not to illuminate everything, but to soften the darkness. People gathered closer, not to discuss the day, but to share its quiet end. Sounds were low, movements were minimal. The day released its hold without resistance. Night arrived fully, and with it came a sense of completion that did not depend on accomplishment. What mattered had been done simply by continuing. These days did not stand out from one another. They blended, forming a steady current that carried life forward without strain. Time passed, not as something noticed, but as something lived. And within this unbroken rhythm of ordinary days, where effort and rest remained in balance, the steady flow of everyday life continued, shaping everything gently and without hurry. The days did not need to be remembered individually. They were not meant to stand apart. Each one leaned softly into the next, creating a sense of continuity that felt reassuring rather than repetitive. Morning followed night the way breath follows breath, without thought, without interruption. As light returned each day, it revealed the same familiar spaces, subtly altered by time but never transformed enough to feel unfamiliar. A stone placed days before felt slightly warmer now, more settled. A path walked many times felt smoother underfoot, shaped slowly by presence rather than pressure. People moved through these spaces with an ease that came from trust. Trust in the land, trust in one another, trust in the rhythm that had never failed them. There was no need to plan far ahead. Tomorrow would arrive ready to receive what today left unfinished. Work remained steady and unremarkable. Stones were measured not with tools, but with the body. A step here, a pause there, a slight adjustment, guided by instinct rather than instruction. Balance was felt in the shoulders, in the hands, in the way weight settled naturally when something was placed well. There was no hurry to see progress. Progress revealed itself quietly over time, visible only when one paused long enough to notice that something felt more complete than it had before. Even then, the feeling was gentle, never triumphant. The air carried familiar scents: warm stone, dry earth, water drawn up and poured back into the ground. These smells did not demand attention. They simply existed, part of the atmosphere that wrapped itself around daily life. Sound, too, was subdued. Footsteps softened by sand, the quiet knock of stone meeting stone. Occasional voices, low and measured, rising briefly before dissolving again into silence. Much of the work happened without words, guided by shared understanding. Food continued to arrive at regular intervals, not as an event, but as nourishment woven into the day. Preparation was simple, ingredients were known, movements repeated themselves in the same calm sequence, producing results that felt reliable and comforting. Eating happened without distraction. People sat where it felt natural to sit. Some leaned against stone, warmed by the sun. Others rested in shade. There was no sense of rushing back to work. The day was wide enough to hold both effort and ease. Children drifted through these moments, sometimes close, sometimes at the edge of attention. They learned without trying to learn, the way a hand steadied a stone, the way a body shifted its weight before lifting. These details settled into them quietly. Afternoons stretched long and unpressured. The sun traced its slow arc overhead, marking time without insistence. Shadows shifted gradually, and with them, attention shifted too. Tasks that required strength were completed earlier. Lighter movements followed later. When fatigue appeared, it was welcomed. It signaled the right moment to slow. No one pushed past it unnecessarily. Rest was seen as part of the work, not its opposite. Sometimes nothing happened at all for long stretches. People sat, watched, waited. This waiting was not empty. It was attentive, open, comfortable. It allowed the body and mind to settle fully into the present moment. As the day leaned toward evening, activity softened again. Movements became smaller, voices quieter. The air cooled slightly, bringing relief and calm. The sense of having lived through another complete cycle arrived naturally. Nightfall did not bring an abrupt end. It unfolded gradually, dimming the world until details blurred and only essential shapes remained. The work of the day loosened its grip, releasing everyone gently into rest. These repeated days did not dull awareness. they sharpened it. Through repetition, attention became more refined. Small changes were noticed. Subtle differences felt meaningful. Time was not something to escape, it was something to inhabit. And as this steady, attentive way of living continued day after day, season after season, it sustained not only the work itself, but the people who carried it, preparing them quietly for the subtle shifts that would one day arrive, almost unnoticed, within this same gentle rhythm. The rhythm itself did not change, but the way it was felt grew deeper. Days carried a familiar weight, comfortable and reassuring, like a well-worn garment, nothing pressed forward, nothing pulled away. Life continued to move at the pace it always had, guided by light, temperature, and the steady agreement between people and place. Mornings still began without sound. The sky lightened gradually, and with it came awareness. Eyes opened, breath adjusted. Muscles remembered their purpose before the mind had fully settled into wakefulness. There was no separation between rest and activity, one flowed into the other with ease. The ground beneath bare feet felt cool at first, then slowly warmer as the day progressed. This sensation alone was enough to mark time. No one needed to count hours when the body already understood where the day stood. Water was drawn again, poured again, returned again. Each motion followed the same gentle arc. The hands performing these tasks did not feel ownership over them. They were simply part of a larger pattern that repeated itself naturally. Stone remained patient. It never demanded attention. It responded only when approached carefully. Some days it was touched more than others. Some days it was left entirely alone. Both felt equally appropriate. People learned to read small signals, a slight resistance in a stone's balance, a subtle shift in the ground beneath it. These cues guided action more effectively than instruction ever could. When something felt uncertain, it was left to rest until certainty returned. Voices remained low. When words were spoken, they were practical and unadorned. There was no need to explain what everyone already understood. Silence filled the spaces between words comfortably, never awkward, never empty. Midday continued to invite stillness. The sun rested overhead, and with it came a natural slowing. Bodies sought shade instinctively. Eyes narrowed against brightness, then closed briefly. Rest did not interrupt the day, it completed it. During these quieter moments, awareness widened. Sounds carried farther, the faint movement of air, the distant call of birds, the subtle creak of materials settling into place. These details did not distract, they anchored attention gently. When movement returned, it did so without resistance. Muscles engaged smoothly. Tasks resumed where they had been left, without frustration or urgency. Nothing had been lost by waiting. Food arrived again, simple and expected. Preparation followed the same motions each time. Eating restored energy, without excess. The body received what it needed, and nothing more. Children continued to observe. They moved in and out of activity freely, sometimes helping, sometimes watching, sometimes simply being present. Learning happened quietly, absorbed rather than taught. Afternoon light softened gradually, shadows lengthened, the air cooled slightly. These changes guided effort more clearly than any schedule could. Heavier work faded away, lighter tasks took its place. There was satisfaction in stopping at the right moment, not because something was finished, but because the day itself felt complete. Tools were set down, gently. Stones remained untouched, ready for another time. As evening approached, gatherings became closer and quieter. Small lights appeared again, steady and warm. Their glow softened edges and eased attention. The day released itself fully. Night settled without ceremony. Darkness did not feel heavy. It felt like rest. People withdrew naturally into stillness, carrying with them the calm of having moved in harmony with their surroundings. These repeated cycles did more than sustain daily life. They created a deep familiarity with time itself. Time was not something passing by. It was something lived within, comfortably and without strain. And as this long sequence of ordinary days continued, uninterrupted and unhurried, it allowed life to remain steady, even as the world beyond it shifted slowly, setting the stage for changes that would arrive gently, not as disruption, but as quiet adaptation. This steadiness did not require effort. It existed because nothing pushed against it. The days were shaped by acceptance rather than ambition, and within that acceptance, life found a depth that did not need to be named. People became deeply familiar with waiting, waiting for the air to cool, waiting for stone to settle, waiting for the body to signal readiness. Waiting was not empty time. It was attentive time, filled with awareness rather than expectation. Small adjustments continued to happen almost without notice. A stone placed months earlier felt different now, more secure, more integrated with the ground beneath it. A path shifted slightly as feet followed it again and again, smoothing its edges without intention. The body learned when to move and when to stop. Fatigue was not something to overcome, but something to listen to. When it arrived, it was acknowledged and allowed to pass in its own time. Rest restored balance naturally. Tools aged alongside their users. Handles smoothed where hands had gripped them. Edges softened, then were sharpened again, not to perfection, but to usefulness. These objects carried memory without needing to preserve it consciously. Work and life remained inseparable. There was no sharp division between labour and living. Everything done served both purposes at once. A stone placed carefully supported the structure and reinforced a shared sense of order. A meal shared quietly nourished the body and strengthened connection. As days accumulated, people became less concerned with outcomes and more attentive to process. The act of doing something well, patiently, was enough. Completion was not a goal. Continuation was. The landscape responded in its own way. Surfaces warmed and cooled, sand shifted, then settled. The world did not resist these activities. It absorbed them, slowly and without complaint. Children grew older within this rhythm. What had once been observed became practiced. Movements learned through watching became instinctive. There was no clear moment when learning ended and knowing began. One simply blended into the other. Elders remained present, not as authorities, but as reminders of continuity. Their movements were slower, but their understanding was deeper. When they spoke, it was usually to suggest patience rather than change. Even conflict, when it appeared, was quiet. Disagreements unfolded slowly, often dissolving before they needed resolution. The shared rhythm made urgency feel unnecessary. The passing of seasons did not disrupt this flow. It enriched it. Cooler days invited slower movement. Warmer days encouraged early starts and long pauses. Each change was welcomed as part of the same pattern. Night continued to arrive gently. Darkness did not end the day. It softened it. Activities narrowed. Attention turned inward. Rest was not an escape, but a natural continuation of the day's arc. Sleep came easily. Bodies accustomed to balance did not struggle to release the day. Breath deepened. Muscles relaxed. The mind loosened its grip without resistance. These nights restored more than energy. They restored trust in the rhythm, in the land, in the continuity of tomorrow. Nothing needed to be planned. Tomorrow would arrive, shaped much like today, ready to receive whatever was left undone. And within this deeply familiar cycle, where nothing demanded immediate change, life remained steady enough to absorb the slow, almost imperceptible shifts that time brings to all things, allowing the story to move forward without breaking its calm. In this way, the days continued to gather softly, one resting upon another, forming a long, unbroken stretch of lived time. Nothing announced that a great span was passing. No marker stood apart to say that something important had been completed. Importance was found instead in consistency, in the quiet confidence that tomorrow would feel much like today. Morning light returned again, diffused and gentle. It touched familiar surfaces and revealed nothing new, and that familiarity itself was comforting. The world did not surprise the senses, it reassured them. People moved with minimal effort now, their bodies shaped by routine. Lifting felt easier not because stones were lighter, but because movement had become economical. Every gesture held only what it needed, no excess, no strain. The ground bore the marks of many footsteps, but lightly. Paths existed because they were used, not because they were imposed. They curved naturally, following ease rather than design. Walking them felt instinctive, as if the feet themselves remembered where to go. Work continued without tension. Some days required more attention, others less. Both were accepted equally. When a task demanded patience, patience was given. When nothing needed doing, nothing was done. Silence remained a frequent companion. It was not empty. It carried the weight of shared understanding. People could be near one another without feeling the need to speak. Presence alone was enough. When conversation did arise, it flowed slowly, often returning to familiar observations. The weather, the feel of stone, the way light had shifted. These topics did not exhaust themselves. They deepened with repetition. Midday rest remained sacred. The sun reached its highest point, and movement softened almost instinctively. Bodies sought cooler surfaces. Breath slowed. Thought became loose and unstructured, drifting without resistance. In these moments, time seemed to stretch. Not in a way that felt endless, but in a way that felt spacious. There was room to exist without purpose, room for attention to rest gently on nothing in particular. When activity returned, it did not feel like an interruption of rest. It felt like its continuation. Muscles engaged smoothly, focus returned without effort. The rhythm resumed exactly where it had paused. Food appeared again, reliable and simple. Preparation followed the same calm sequence. Eating grounded the body, reinforcing the sense that needs would be met without urgency. As afternoon advanced, shadows lengthened across familiar surfaces. The change was slow enough to go unnoticed until it was already well underway. This gradual transition guided behavior gently, without instruction. Some stones were left untouched for long periods. Their presence did not create pressure. Waiting was part of the process. Nothing deteriorated from being left alone. In fact, many things improved by settling fully into place. Children continued to move freely within this world, now beginning to participate more directly. Small tasks were given without ceremony. Success was quiet. Mistakes were absorbed without judgment. Elders observed with calm assurance. Their attention rested on the flow rather than the details. They knew that continuity mattered more than correction, that patience preserved more than precision. As evening approached once more, the air cooled and activity softened. The day's efforts dissolved into a sense of completion that did not depend on visible results. Enough had happened simply by being lived. Lights appeared again, steady and warm. Their glow did not compete with the darkness, it complemented it. Shadows grew softer, edges blurred. The world felt smaller and more intimate. Gatherings became quiet and close. Words were few, movements minimal. The day was released without resistance, allowed to settle fully into night. Sleep arrived naturally. Bodies accustomed to rhythm did not resist stillness. Breath deepened, muscles loosened, thought drifted without direction. These nights restored balance as surely as the days maintained it. Together, they formed a continuous loop of effort and rest, each supporting the other. And within this long, seamless flow of daily life, where nothing was rushed and nothing was forced, the steady continuation itself became the foundation that allowed change. When it finally came, to arrive gently and without disturbance. Nothing signaled an ending to these days. They did not gather toward a conclusion. Instead, they spread outward, evenly and patiently, like light across open ground. The rhythm had become so familiar that it no longer felt like something created. It felt like something that simply existed. People no longer thought of their actions as part of a larger effort. Lifting, resting, walking, waiting, all of it felt the same. Purpose had dissolved into presence. Each moment carried enough meaning on its own. The body learned to conserve itself. Movements grew smaller, more precise. Energy was spent only where it was needed. This economy of motion did not feel restrictive. It felt freeing, as though nothing unnecessary remained. Stone continued to respond slowly, faithfully. A piece placed long ago now felt inseparable from its surroundings. Edges softened slightly. Weight settled deeper. What had once required attention now held itself. The land accepted everything without comment. It warmed during the day, cooled at night, and offered the same support, regardless of how much or how little was asked of it. This reliability allowed the people to relax fully into their routines. Sounds remained subdued. The environment spoke in subtle ways, the faint movement of air, the soft contact of materials, the occasional quiet voice. These sounds blended together, forming a background that never interrupted thought. Time passed unnoticed. Days folded into weeks, weeks into seasons. The passage was felt not through counting, but through sensation, the angle of light, the temperature of stone, the length of shadows at rest. Meals continued to arrive as expected. The body recognized nourishment before the mind did. Eating restored balance without excess. Hunger never lingered long enough to become discomfort. Children grew steadily, shaped by what surrounded them. They did not need to be told how things worked. They absorbed understanding naturally, through repetition and observation. What felt ordinary to them was the result of generations of patience. Elders remained woven into daily life. Their presence did not command attention. It grounded it. When they moved, others adjusted subtly, not out of obligation, but out of respect for continuity. Rest deepened as familiarity increased. Sleep arrived without struggle. The body knew when to release the day. The mind followed easily, unburdened by urgency or unresolved thought. Dreams, when they came, were simple. Often they mirrored the day, light, movement, stillness, then dissolved quietly before morning returned. Each new day resumed where the last had ended. Nothing was lost overnight. Nothing needed to be recovered. The rhythm held everything securely. In this way, daily life did more than sustain work. It sustained calm. It created a space where change did not need to announce itself, where adaptation could happen slowly, without resistance. And as this long, patient flow continued unbroken, unhurried, deeply familiar, it carried life forward into the next phase, where the rhythm remained, but attention began to shift, almost imperceptibly, toward the subtle signs that everything, even the most enduring patterns, eventually begins to move. The movement was so slight that it could not be pointed to. It was not a change in routine, nor a break in habit. It was more like a soft awareness settling into the background, a gentle understanding that nothing stands completely still, even when it feels steady. Days still arrived as they always had. Light still found the same surfaces. Work still followed the same calm sequence. Yet within this familiarity, people began to notice how much had already been done, how much now simply remained. There was less impulse to add, more comfort in leaving things as they were. Stones already placed were touched lightly, checked with care, then left alone. Their presence felt complete, not in need of improvement. Waiting grew longer, but never heavy. Long pauses became part of the rhythm itself. A day might pass with very little movement at all, and that felt right. Stillness no longer felt like rest between actions. It felt like an action of its own. The body responded to this ease. Muscles held less tension. Breath moved more deeply without effort. The mind wandered less, content to stay close to the present moment. Sound grew even quieter. The smallest noises became noticeable, the shift of fabric, the faint contact of skin with stone, the distant echo of movement carried on air. These sounds did not distract. They soothed, reminding everyone of their place within a larger, calm environment. Food remained simple, but meals lingered longer, eating slowed. Tastes were familiar enough that they did not demand attention, allowing the body to receive nourishment without thought. Children mirrored this gentleness. Their play softened, their movements grew more deliberate. They learned not only how to act, but how to pause, how to sit comfortably within silence. Elders watched these moments with quiet satisfaction. They recognized this stage not as an ending, but as a deepening. A time when doing gives way slightly to being, and being proves itself sufficient. Light continued its daily journey, rising and falling without interruption. Shadows stretched and withdrew. These changes were no longer guides for action alone. They became companions, marking time without urgency. Sometimes, entire stretches of the day passed, with nothing added and nothing taken away. The world held itself steady, and within that steadiness, a sense of completeness grew. This completeness did not feel final, it felt balanced, like a vessel filled to exactly the right level, neither overflowing nor empty. And as this balance settled in quiet, stable, and deeply familiar, the long chapter of daily life reached its fullest expression. Ready to carry the story gently forward, not through disruption, but through the calm recognition that even the most enduring rhythms prepare the ground for subtle change. That recognition did not bring concern. It brought clarity, a quiet understanding that continuity does not mean stillness, and that steadiness can include gentle movement without losing its shape. Nothing altered suddenly. The same light still returned each morning. The same spaces held their familiar calm. But attention rested a little differently now, less on repetition itself and more on how repetition had shaped everything it touched. People lingered longer at the edges of their routines. Before lifting, there was a pause. Before placing, a breath. These moments were not hesitation. They were awareness, a deepened sensitivity to balance and timing. Stone continued to settle. Some pieces felt more integrated than before, as if they had finally found their place after long patience. Others revealed small needs support here, adjustment there, nothing urgent, nothing alarming. Work adapted quietly. Tasks, once done automatically, were now approached with a softer focus. Maintenance became more common than expansion. Care replaced addition, and care felt satisfying in its own way. The land responded gently. Surfaces warmed and cooled as always. Water followed its familiar paths. These cycles reassured everyone that change did not mean loss. It meant continuation in a slightly different form. Children noticed this shift without naming it. They moved more slowly, watching longer before acting. Their curiosity turned inward, toward understanding how things remained stable rather than how they were made new. Elders recognized this phase clearly. They had lived through it before, though never exactly the same way. They did not direct it, they allowed it, trusting that balance would reassert itself naturally. Rest deepened further, sleep came earlier and lasted longer. The body welcomed it easily, releasing the day without resistance. Dreams grew simpler, often fading before they could be remembered. Days continued to pass, still blending together, but with a subtle new texture. Time felt layered now, as if many moments rested within each other, connected rather than separate. This was not an ending to daily life. It was daily life settling into maturity, steady enough to hold what came next, open enough to adapt without strain. And as this mature rhythm held firm, calm, practiced, and quietly resilient, it allowed the story to drift onward into the next phase, where slow change could be noticed without disturbance, and continuity could be preserved, even as attention gently shifted forward. The shift did not announce itself. It arrived the way dusk arrives, by soft degrees, felt more than seen. The days remained familiar, but awareness rested a little longer on details that had always been there. A pause before lifting, a breath before setting something down, Not hesitation, just listening. Work continued, steady and unremarkable. Yet the hands moved with a slightly different care now, as though time itself had become a companion in the task. Stones were checked more often than they were moved. Surfaces were touched lightly, confirming balance rather than seeking progress. The ground spoke quietly through sensation. A firmness here, a subtle, yielding there, nothing alarming. Only reminders that everything settles in its own way. When something felt uncertain, it was left to rest. Waiting felt natural, even necessary. Light still guided the day, but it no longer hurried anyone along. Morning brightness invited movement. Midday warmth invited stillness. Evening cool invited release. These cues were followed gently, without needing explanation. Conversations became even fewer. When they happened, they circled familiar observations: how the air felt, how a stone had changed after many days, how patience seemed to make work lighter. Words rose softly, then returned to silence without insistence. Children noticed the change without naming it. Their play slowed. Watching lasted longer than doing. They learned that not every action needs to lead somewhere, and that careful attention can be a kind of movement. Elders recognized this phase clearly. They had seen it before, though never exactly the same. They did not direct it or warn against it. They trusted it, knowing that steadiness allows adjustment without strain. Rest deepened. Sleep arrived earlier and stayed longer. The body released the day easily, as if reassured by familiarity. Dreams, when they appeared, were simple, light, space, slow movement, then gone. Days continued to pass, still blending together, but with a gentler texture. Time felt layered now, carrying memory without weight. Nothing pressed forward, nothing fell behind. This was not decline, it was refinement. A narrowing of focus toward care, toward maintenance, toward listening. The rhythm remained intact, but its purpose softened. And as this refined rhythm continued unchanged on the surface, quietly adapting beneath it, prepared the way for the next gentle turn, where change would be absorbed without disruption, and the calm of continuity would remain unbroken. Transformation did not feel like loss. It felt like a soft rebalancing, the way a long day naturally leans into evening. What had once expanded outward now turned inward, focusing more on care than creation, more on tending than building. The routines remained familiar. Mornings still arrived quietly, work still followed the cool hours. But there was less desire to add, and more patience for preserving what already existed. Stones were checked rather than placed. Alignments were observed rather than extended. Knowledge settled into memory. Skills were practiced with calm confidence, not ambition. Those who worked with stone understood its limits as well as its strengths. They listened more closely to the ground, to the subtle language of weight and balance. Generations continued to overlap. The young learned not only how things were built, but how they were maintained. Care became the lesson passed along most clearly. To keep something standing was now as meaningful as raising it once had been. The wider world moved on in its own ways. Distant changes were felt faintly, like echoes carried on wind. Yet within this place, life stayed measured and inward-looking. There was comfort in continuity, even as the sense of purpose slowly shifted. Belief softened rather than faded. Meaning was found less in reaching forward and more in holding steady. Light still mattered, not as a guide toward expansion, but as a reassurance that patterns continued. Nothing collapsed, nothing fell away suddenly. Instead, attention narrowed gently, like the last light of day gathering itself before resting. What endured did so quietly, without needing to be renewed or explained. This phase was not an ending. It was a settling, a recognition that endurance itself is a form of success, that to remain, calmly and without resistance, is its own achievement. And from this settled state, where change has been absorbed and balance restored, the story drifts toward reflection, toward the echoes that remain long after the work itself has grown silent. What remains does not speak loudly. It does not explain itself. It simply stays. Stone holds its shape. Space holds its calm. The presence of what was made continues without asking to be understood. People come and go. Footsteps pass softly nearby. Some pause, some move on. The structures do not react. They receive attention the way they receive light, without preference, without urgency. Meaning changes as time moves forward. What was once part of daily life becomes something to look at, to consider quietly. The work that filled ordinary days becomes a reminder that ordinary effort, repeated with care, can outlast its moment. These remnants do not insist on a single story. They allow many interpretations to rest beside them. To some, they suggest patience. To others, continuity. To many, simply a sense of stillness that feels rare and comforting. The land continues its cycles. Light returns each morning. Night settles each evening. The structures remain within this flow, neither resisting nor directing it. They are part of the rhythm now, not separate from it. Memory does not arrive all at once. It drifts in slowly, shaped by perspective and distance. What matters most is not exact detail, but the feeling that something steady once existed here, and that its steadiness still lingers. In this way, the legacy is not instruction, it is atmosphere. A reminder that time does not always erase. Sometimes it preserves, gently, by allowing things to settle fully into place. As thoughts soften and attention loosens, the presence of these quiet forms invites rest rather than analysis. They ask nothing, they offer nothing urgent. They simply remain, calm and untroubled. And as reflection gives way to rest, as the mind grows lighter and less focused, the story prepares to close not with a conclusion, but with a quiet release into the night. The story does not need to end in order to rest. It can simply become still, the way a room grows quieter once the lights are lowered, and nothing more is asked of it. What has been built, what has endured, remains where it is unconcerned, with whether it is being watched or remembered. Time continues in its own gentle way. Night follows day. Light fades, then returns. The world moves forward without urgency, carrying these quiet forms along with it, as naturally as breath. You do not need to hold on to details. You do not need to follow every thought to its end. The calm presence of this story is enough. Like stone warmed by sunlight, it slowly releases what it has gathered, returning warmth to the surrounding air. Imagine the desert at night now. The sky wide and unchanging, stars resting in familiar patterns, the land cooling, settling, at ease with itself. Nothing moves quickly, nothing demands attention. These monuments, and the people who once shaped them, have completed their part. What remains is a sense of patience, of steady effort given freely and without expectation. A reminder that lasting things are often built quietly, and that quiet can be a strength. As your breathing slows, let the story loosen its hold. Let thoughts drift away without needing direction. There is nowhere to go, nothing to prepare for, only rest. Thank you for spending this time here, in this gentle place between history and sleep. Wherever you are listening from tonight, may the hours ahead be calm and untroubled. Good night.